Scripture reading this evening will be from Psalm 11, starting in verse 4. Psalm 11, starting in verse 4. The Lord is in his holy temple. The Lord's throne is in heaven. His eyes behold, his eyelids test the sons of men. The Lord tests the righteous and the wicked, and the one who loves violence his soul hates.
We've been going through the Psalms for now about 10 to 11 months, and we've been doing a psalm a month, and we have reached Psalm 11. And if you read the book of Psalms, there are quite a few of them that are attributed to King David. And really, most of them are seen in book 1. I believe there's 5 different books within the book of Psalms. And book 1 really contains a lot of the ones that David pens down himself through the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, of course. And we've noticed the different types of psalms. We noticed the different themes and the main point of each psalm. But something that we really need to look for in a psalm, if we can find it, sometimes we can't, because the Holy Spirit does not reveal that within the inspired writings. But one thing that really helps in understanding a psalm is the historical background. And a lot of them are seen in David's psalms. They're typically dealing with either Saul or Absalom. There's one who was, I believe his name was Cush the Benjamite, which some believe is a different name for King Saul, who was also a Benjamite. But either way, a lot of David's psalms are dealing with a situation that is negative towards him, and he is looking to God for help. That's pretty much a summary of every psalm of David. But each one is pretty unique, though, because if you read all the psalms, specifically the ones of David, they can seem as if they're very redundant, because it sounds like he's just saying the same thing over and over again. And perhaps he is. But in different ways, he is describing God in the situations that he's dealing with. And if you look at the titles if you've got your psalm notes, I don't know if you've started your own psalm notebook for this series, because there's going to be quite a few of them. If you notice the title that we've given each one, it has something to do with God. God, our fill in the blank. It could be God, our source of delight. God, our righteous judge. God, our whatever. Well, here in Psalm 11, we see that David is dealing with God, our holy temple of refuge. And this idea of refuge, a safe place, David mentions that many different times in his Psalms, especially up to Psalm 11 and 12, that he is my rock, he is my fortress, he is my refuge, he is my safe place. There's a reason that David keeps saying that over and over again, is because if you read 1 Samuel, even into 2 Samuel, you'll see that David deals with a lot. David, who started out as a young shepherd boy, I believe the youngest of his brothers, who was kind of seen as the runt of his brothers. All of his older brothers, or most of them, went off to fight for King Saul as strong, valiant soldiers. Well, David was just a harp-playing sheep herder. And he was seen as somebody who was very short and scrawny, and he didn't really stand out as the strongest one in the group. But because of his faith, he was seen as the strongest one in the group. Because he says, look, this uncircumcised Philistine, 1 Samuel chapter 17, you're going to seriously let him talk about God that way? And they say, well, what are you going to do about it, David? Look at you. We could take you on with both arms behind our backs. And he said, no, you can't. I have taken down a bear. I've taken down a lion. I've done all these things because God was with me and allowed me to beat these creatures. Goliath is nothing compared to me. Well, because of all this fame that he received, because of his faith, a lot of Israel, if not all of Israel, favored David more than Saul. And King Saul did not like that too much. And if you look at King Saul's personality, he was very he was very timid. He was very fickle. He wanted to please people. He didn't like to be on the bad side of some people. He wanted to always please individuals. Unfortunately, the one he needed to please, he never really looked to try and please, and that was God. And not only was he a timid king, he was almost bipolar. He looked like, on one hand, he loved David as a son. He kept him close, and in the next verse, he's trying to kill him with a javelin. It's just he goes back and forth until ultimately Jonathan, Saul's son, tells David, you got to get out of here. He's going to kill you. And David says, no, I don't want to leave. And Jonathan said, well, you know what? I'll go to supper with my dad, and I will let him know that you will not be attending, and you had to do something. And if he rages, then that will pretty much seal the deal that you can't stay here. If he is at peace with the situation, then you can stay. Well, David had to end up leaving. And him and his mighty soldiers, they were pretty much on the run. They were mighty, valiant warriors of David. And David, being the leader of that group, saw them as a threat to his reputation. But David, every single time he had a chance to kill Saul, David said, I can't harm God's anointed. I just can't do that. It's not within my authority to kill Saul, even though he has wronged me, even though he may deserve it. It's not my place to do it. That's God's place. I am simply just a messenger. I am simply just a steward. And if God wants me to do something, then I will do it. But he has not told me to kill King Saul. Therefore, I will not. This is most likely the context of Psalm 11. In Psalm 11, we do not have a definite historical background. But we do know this. Within the context of Psalm 11, we will see that David is receiving counsel that really shows you need to doubt God and trust in yourself. Because you can't, it seems like every time you trust in God, you're still dealing with whomever it is that's trying to kill you. You're still dealing with whatever it is that is causing harm to your well-being, David. You need to flee to a mountain and take care of yourself. Well, in 1 Samuel chapter 21, I believe, 23, I keep saying Psalm. 1 Samuel chapter 23, starting in verse 24. This is in the context of Saul pursuing David. Notice what it says. Then they arose and went to Ziph before Saul. Now David and his men were in the wilderness of Maon in Arabah to the south of Jeshimon, down to the rock, and stayed in the wilderness of Maon. And when Saul heard it, he pursued David in the wilderness of Maon. Saul went on one side of the mountain, and David and his men on the other side of the mountain. And David was hurrying to get away from Saul, for Saul and his men were surrounding David and his men to seize them. But a messenger came to Saul, saying, hurry and come, for the Philistines have made a raid on the land. So Saul returned from pursuing David and went to meet the Philistines. Therefore they called that place the Rock of Escape. David went up from there and stayed in the strongholds of En-gedi. Now, the reason I read this is because this sounds very similar to what David is facing in Psalm 11. I'm not saying this is the historical background. What we just read of what David went through happened multiple times. Constantly fleeing from King Saul, constantly getting by the skin of his teeth, and as soon as Saul is about to come upon him, something happens where Saul has to leave the situation, and David gets away. Really, if you look at the flow of the text of 1 and 2 Samuel, God was with David every step of the way, protecting David. Now, let's read Psalm 11 together and break this text down. Very short psalm. There's only 7 verses, but there's a lot to unpack here. Look at verse 1. Starting out with the preface. For the choir director, a psalm of David. In the Lord I take refuge. How can you say to my soul, flee as a bird to your mountain? For behold, the wicked bend the bow. They make ready their arrow upon the string to shoot in darkness at the upright in heart. If the foundations are destroyed, what can the righteous do? The Lord is in his holy temple. The Lord's throne is in heaven. His eyes behold, his eyelids test the sons of men. The Lord tests the righteous and the wicked, and the one who loves violence his soul hates. Upon the wicked he will rain snares. Fire and brimstone and burning wind will be the portion of their cup. For the Lord is righteous. He loves righteousness. The upright will behold his face. What we see here is a very, very short conversation between David and somebody that is attempting to give him wise counsel. And David sees very clearly that this is foolish counsel because of what they're saying about God. And David not only rejects this counsel, but he defends God in the process. Pretty much summarizing the psalm, he says, God is our holy temple of refuge. I don't need to go to any mountain. I don't need to go to anywhere else except God. God is going to protect me even when it seems that I'm going to be surrounded. Now let's look at verses 1 through 3. This psalm, the 7 verses, can be broken down into 2 main sections. Verses 1 through 3, we see the advice of fear. The advice of fear. 1 through 3 is what's being said by the individual trying to give counsel to David. Then you've got verses 4 through 7, which is David speaking or a rebuttal to what has just been said. And we have titled this, The Answer of Faith. Verses 4 through 7, the answer of faith. Let's look and see what this advisor tells David to do. In verse 1, we see reaction to the advice to flee. Look what it says, in the Lord I take refuge. Before we even see what this advisor has to say, David makes it very clear where he stands. He says, in the Lord I take refuge. Some English translations will say, in the Lord I put my trust. This is really a good translation because the idea of refuge, it carries with the idea that I'm trusting, but David explicitly is saying, really poetically saying, I trust God. I don't trust any other man. I don't put my trust in you. I don't put my trust in somebody higher than me that is a king. I put my trust in the one that is above all, which is God. God is in control, and that's where I take my refuge. Now let's get into this conversation, David says. David prefaces this psalm by saying just how much he trusts in Jehovah. Following this, we see how there are many others out there who were trying to convince David not to put his faith and trust in the Lord. Now, look what he says next. How can you say flee? He prefaces the whole psalm by saying, in God I trust. So how on earth can you utter the words you need to flee? Who am I fleeing from? Am I trying to flee from God? He's the only one that can protect me. Now, I want to read you a comment by our brother Tom Waycaster in his commentary on the Psalms. This is what he says. This was the counsel being given to David. In the existing situation of which we are not informed, the psalmist felt that his fleeing would have implied a lack of confidence in God. Rather than fleeing, he would maintain his position and rely upon the deliverance of God. Is what our brother Waycaster has a comment to say about this passage. What is he saying? Well, what David is saying is, if I flee, by you telling me to flee this situation, you are telling me that I do not need to trust in God and how he's going to provide for me and get out of this. Now, in many of our lives, if not all of our lives, at some point, we have dealt with a situation where it seems like I just need to leave. I just want to leave to get out of this situation, when really we know that we just need to trust in God. I'm not saying have blind faith. We've talked a lot about that in the past few Sundays already. The true faith of an individual is built upon evidence, irrefutable evidence. John chapter 20 and verse 31, these things are written so that you might believe, have faith that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God. God does not expect us to just jump off a cliff without any type of evidence or anything to prove that He is who He says that He is. He says, I have proven to you over and over and over again that I will fulfill my promises. You just need to trust in me. Reading this phrase, how can you say flee? In the Lord I take refuge. In the back of my mind, I have echoing the conversation between Job and his wife. Why don't you just curse God and die? And what does Job say? I can't. He's the only one that can get us through this. That's pretty much what was happening here. In few words, the advice given was you need to curse God and trust in yourself. And David says, how can you say that? He's gotten us through all of this, and you're saying to abandon Him now? How often do we do that in our lives today? As Christians, we profess to love God. We profess to trust in God. Well, I've given my life over to Him. That should be enough. Well, that is the start, but that's not just enough. By giving your life over to Him, you are committing to trusting in Him for the rest of your life. And if you say, well, I need to back out and kind of deal with this on my own, what you're saying is, God, you can't do this, so I'm going to have to be in charge now. It's kind of like the one preacher put it this way. I remember dealing with a situation a long time ago, and I was needing some counsel, and I went to this experienced preacher, and I asked him, what should I do? I told him, it seems like I do this, and I do this, and I do this, and it just doesn't work. And he says, well, there's the problem. You're saying, I'm doing this, I'm doing this, I am doing this. And then he gave this analogy. He says, imagine that there is a little kid who has broken his toy, his little Hot Wheels toy. The wheel has fallen off, and he goes to his father who knows how to fix these kinds of things. And the child says, Father, can you please fix this toy for me? And the father says, yes, go put it on the table. I will get to it when I see fit. Well, then that child puts it on the table, and then he goes into his room, and he's playing, and he's like, well, I don't have the toy that I really want. I'm going to go see if my dad has fixed the toy. So he walks into the living room. It hasn't been 2 minutes. And he says, Dad, have you fixed the toy yet? And the dad says, no, I haven't fixed it yet. I will get to it when I get to it. You just go and do your thing, and then I will do my thing when I get to it. Well, the child goes back, and now about 5 minutes later, his little head peeks out and says, have you finished the toy yet? And the dad says, no, I haven't finished it yet. And this happens like 3 or 4 different times. And eventually, the child doesn't ask anymore. He says, I'll just get to it. Don't worry. I know how to fix it. And what ends up happening is all 4 wheels fall off. That's what we do sometimes in our lives. We go to God in prayer. We ask our Heavenly Father to help us. And then we say, well, how come it's not fixed yet? Is it fixed yet, God? No, not yet. On my time, I'll get it done in my time. Okay. A day goes by. Is it done yet? Well, it hasn't happened yet, therefore it's not done yet. And then we eventually say after a few days and a few prayers, I'll just do it myself. I'm done with this. And guess what? Our life falls apart because we try to take it upon ourselves to fix our own lives. We need to be like David and say, how on earth can you say, abandon God and fix it yourself, when God is the only one who is our refuge that can save us and deal with the situation, David says. Look at verse 2. Remembers the attitude of fear. Verse 1, we see the reaction to the advice to flee. Look at verse 2. Remembers the attitude of fear. The wicked bend their bow. They have fitted their arrows to the string at the upright of heart. What's happening here is this individual who's giving advice is trying to solidify the fact that God is not doing anything and that David needs to step in and do something. Because the bows are bent, the arrows are ready, and the swords are sharpened, and the enemy is ready to fight. Where's God? God is not here. Where is He? The enemy's ready, but is God ready? The advisor to David is focusing on what the enemy is doing and to whom the enemy is doing it to. Notice where the advisor's focus is on. They're more worried about what the enemy's doing rather than what God can and will do. Well, what is he focusing on? Well, he's focusing on what the enemy is doing, targeting and killing. He's focusing on who the enemy is doing it to the righteous. You know, I'm up here preaching about we don't need to be focusing on what the enemy is doing. We need to be focusing on what God can do and will do. Brethren, I understand it's difficult not to focus on the enemy. I do it all the time, and I have to correct myself because I'm a worrier. I have to have everything just right. I'm a perfectionist. I'm OCD. I have to have all of these things just right, and if just one thing's off, it gets to me. Well, sometimes it's not, well, really all the time, it's not about me fixing it. It's about putting my trust in God and letting God deal with the situation. If I try to take a hold of the situation, guess what I'm going to be focusing on? I'm going to be focusing on all those who can destroy my plans. But if I put my plans in God's hands, guess who I have to worry about? Nobody. Because God is in control. God is the one that can destroy the enemy and protect the righteous. But according to this advisor, that's not where this focus was. It's where David's focus was, but his advisor, that's not where it was. Look at verse 3. Righteous acts will fail. Listen to this advice. If the foundations are destroyed, what hope is there, or what can the righteous do? You know what this advisor is saying? Even though you live a good life, and even though you live a godly life, and you're righteous, you're morally right in all things, what if something happens? What if the foundations break? What if your plans crumble and fall? What if, that those two words can get us in trouble very, very quickly. I mentioned that I was a worrier and I'm a perfectionist. I remember having to deal with different situations in high school, which situations sounds more severe than it actually was. It's more math tests and different things that to a high schooler, man, this is bigger than the world. I have no idea how I'm going to get through this. Well, I remember coming up with all kinds of scenarios. I remember thinking, what if this happens? What if this happens? I, at one point, actually listed and wrote down every outcome that this could, what actually could come to pass. And there were like some 70 or 80 different outcomes. And I thought, you know what? As maddening as this is, at least I'm prepared. I've got 80 different outcomes, and guess which outcome it was? It was the 81st. It was the one that I did not account for. And really, you know what happens? The 81st was the best scenario. This advisor to a follower of God was saying, what if God fails? Brethren, that's not even a possibility. God is not going to fail. God is not going to leave you in the dust. What if? What if? We don't deal in what ifs, we deal in what is. Jesus even says, don't worry about tomorrow. They have enough problem for themselves. You deal with the now, because tomorrow may not even come, James chapter 3 and chapter 4, or James chapter 4, verses 13 through 17. I don't need to concern myself about things that may or may not happen. I need to deal with the situations at hand and let God deal with the future that may or may not come. I have no idea what tomorrow holds. I may worry myself to death about tomorrow, and then Jesus comes back. Did I glorify God in that time that I worried? Absolutely not. What if? Don't worry about the what ifs. Worry about what the what is, and that is God. These words in the mouth of David's friends meant to be a warning or caution, but here was the idea. This is essentially what they're saying in verses 1 through 3. There is no good within the government or rule over you, so what can one man do to stop it? Essentially, what they're saying is, even though you're righteous, that doesn't mean that the king is going to love you. It doesn't mean that you're going to get out of these hard situations. You know what? You're right, advisor, but you know the one who can get me out of these situations? God. It does not matter if King Saul is after me. It does not matter if my son Absalom is trying to assassinate me. Where was David's faith and trust? It was in God. He, even though struggled mentally and emotionally with these situations because he's human, he did not allow that to rule his life. He allowed God to rule his life, and that brought him peace. Psalm 3, I lay down my head and rest, and I wake up the next day, and the Lord has sustained me, even though there are 10,000s of people surrounding about. David says, even though I'm surrounded by an army of 10,000s of people, I can go to bed at night and sleep soundly, even though I'm surrounded by the enemy in war. How on earth was David able to have that kind of peace at night? Because God was his holy temple of refuge. That's why. Now we looked at, let's look at this last statement. What can the righteous do? What if the foundations fall? What if God fails? What is the righteous able to do about it? When David heard these words from his friends, as one commentator said, his head probably told him there was something to them. There was probably some truth to this. But then look at his response. But his heart told him that to heed the advice to flee would be a compromise. What this commentator is saying is, it's very easy to listen to counsel and to let your brain control the situation rather than giving your heart over to God and letting God control the situation. When you're going through a very difficult time and people give you advice, and it's really not good advice, but it's advice that might fix the situation now, immediately, it's very tempting because that means I don't have to deal with it now. But what are the repercussions in the future? Is that going to cause more issues that you're going to have to deal with later? That's why you need to think before you act. Think before you speak. Go to God in prayer. That's what David did. And look how he responds. His answer was an answer of faith. Brethren, if our answer is not like David's when somebody comes to us and says, what if God fails? If we do not say something like this, we need to repent. Rather than saying, well, you're probably right. No, they're not probably right. There's no possibility of God failing the righteous. Look what David says in verses 4 through 7, the answer of faith. Look at verse 4, the Holy One. You want to know how he responds? He says, let's consider the Holy One. How else does he respond? Verses 5 through 6, let's consider the Just One. And then verse 7, he says, let's finally consider the Righteous One. David's answer is not refuting and saying, you're wrong and you're this. He says, oh, you think God is not able to fulfill? Well, let's just talk about God real quick. God is the righteous one. God is the just one. God is the holy one. That's how David defends. That's how David answers with faith. He talks about God. Brethren, when we go through a hard situation, no matter what that situation may be, whether that is somebody has wronged us, whether that is we are dealing with financial issues, whether that is dealing with a loss, dealing with sickness, no matter, you plug in any situation, if your answer is God is a just one, God is a holy one, God is a righteous one, if that's our answer, we'll get through no matter what situation that is. That's how David was able to overcome, was because he described God and that was his answer. Let's consider the Holy One, verse 4. The Lord, Jehovah, Yahweh, is in his holy temple. The Lord's throne is in heaven. The advisor says, David, you got to flee. You got to get out of here. You got to go to the mountains. What if, you're a righteous man, but what if God fails? You know what David's response is? David says, God is in his temple. God's in heaven on his throne. God's in control. That's how David responds. God, Jehovah, is in control. You shouldn't even be contemplating this, friend, advisor. God is sitting on his throne. This verse starts off with a new outlook on this situation. His faith has overcome his fear, even though Saul or Absalom or whoever it may be is pursuing him. God is in his holy temple. He is in heaven looking down with a protective hand. Notice this, his eyes see, his eyelids test the children of man. The word test here, literally scrutinize or squint. The eyes in an examination. So imagine when it says that he tests man, what he's doing here is not that he's tempting as Satan does. Imagine you take a very small object and you're trying to test it. You're squinting, trying to get every single detail. That's what David said God is doing to man. He's looking at them. He's testing them. It's in his hands. He's watching over them. But the idea of testing is, it does carry the fact of one who is put through the fire. Now, if you look at the study of Satan beguiling and God testing or tempting, those are two different actions. The English word says test or tempt, but if you look at the Hebrew word and the Greek word that was used through inspiration, God uses a temptation or testing, really, that improves the individual, that gives hope to the individual. Satan beguiles. He actually, in testing, what he does is he gives false hope and swindles at the exact same time. When it says that God tested Abraham, it says that literally he was putting him through the fire so that he may come out more pure. Those who work with metal, those who do any type of smelting where you melt down gold, that gold ore has impurities, but if you melt it down, what floats to the top? All of those things that are holding it back from being the utmost pure. Then you scrape that away, and then what you have is a pure piece of gold. The only way those impurities could leave is if it was put through the fire. Brethren, sometimes God allows us to go through the fire so that we can come out more pure for Him. Because through our endurance and patience, a few things happen. We gain patience and we gain a stronger faith. And God says that's the whole point of this. Satan says God doesn't want you to do these things because he's trying to keep something good from you. So when trials come, your foundation is built on selfishness and pride, where God says you have a foundation of patience, you have a foundation of faith, and I will fulfill my end. David built his faith, or built his foundation with faith and patience. David went through a lot as a man, but through those situations, what did he gain? He gained patience or endurance, and he gained a stronger faith in God. God looks over the righteous. He is sitting on his throne. He is scrutinizingly looking down and paying attention to everybody, both wicked and righteous. He is the Holy One. Well, what else is he, David? He is the Just One. Look at verse 5 through 6. The Lord tests the righteous and the wicked. Tests here, literally, to test metals by smelting or to examine, to put to the test. We've already discussed this. James 1:12. Blessed is the man who perseveres under trial, for once he has been approved, he will receive the crown of life which the Lord has promised to those who love him. Notice the only way we can be approved is if we persevere. David was approved of because he persevered with God. God was with him and he put his faith in God, and because of that, he was able to persevere. God puts to the test everyone, and there are only two outcomes. There are the approved of by God, and then there are those who are found useless. Now, what do I mean by that? He says clearly, the Lord tests the righteous and the wicked. So both individuals go through the same smelting process, but one, because they have faith in God, they come out pure because they trust in God. The other one who's relying on themselves, guess what's going to happen to them? They're going to become burnt. They're going to become ash. They're going to become absolutely useless. You know, when I think of the idea of being approved of by God, it's mentioned in James 1:12, being approved of, God looks at you and says, this is what I was looking for. But then you have the other group, which is the outcome of the wicked after they fail their test. They are found useless. If you read in the book of Daniel, I'd have to double check, I believe it's Daniel chapter 5. In Daniel chapter 5, you read about, I always get these names mixed up, Belteshazzar. Belteshazzar or Belshazzar. David had one of them. The king had the other. I think it was Belteshazzar. King Belteshazzar, he was a descendant of Nebuchadnezzar, and he loved to party. He loved to do all of these things. He loved to indulge himself with pleasures. While his father was on mission campaigns trying to strengthen the kingdom, he left his son Belteshazzar in charge. And what was Belteshazzar doing? He was living a life of luxury. He was living a life of wanton pleasure, as James says. And you know what God says about him? He says, as he writes on the wall, "Mene, mene tekel upharsin," which in our English tongue means, you have been weighed in the balance. You have been found useless, and I'm giving your kingdom over to somebody else now. Imagine on the day of judgment, God looks at you and says, you have been weighed in the balance. What's the balance? He puts you on the end on one side of the scale. He puts his word on the other side of the scale. And if you are not found the way you're supposed to, that is approved, he will say, you have been measured and you have been found useless. And what's going to happen? He's not going to take away a kingdom, because we don't really have a kingdom, but you know what we do have waiting for us? A home in heaven. You have been weighed in the balance. You have been found useless, and I am now going to give your room, your mansion, to somebody else. Brethren, if David had pursued the advice of this individual and died in that state, that's what David would have heard on the day of judgment. If we have that attitude, what if God fails? What if I need to take over? And that's how we live our life up to the day of judgment. Guess what we're going to hear on the day of judgment? We're going to hear those words. Rather than hearing, well done, thou good and faithful servant. You've been faithful to little, now you will be faithful to much. Enter into your reward. We will hear our Creator, the one who loves us, say, you are useless to me. Brother, I don't know about you. I don't want to hear those words. And I don't want you to hear those words. So how do we overcome this? Well, we need to make sure that we follow in the pathways of Jesus to where we are a part of the group that is approved. How do we do that? When somebody comes to us and says, what if God fails? This is what we say. God is holy and God is just. Let him rain coals on the wicked. Fire and sulfur and a scorching wind shall be the portion of their cup, David says. Not only does he describe God, but he says, those who you mentioned where the bows were ready, the arrows were sharpened, and the swords were drawn, you know what's going to happen to them? This is what's going to happen to them. God is going to rain coals on the wicked. Fire and sulfur and scorching wind shall be their portion of their cup. Here we see the result of not passing the test. Rather, remember we said there was a test that both the righteous and the wicked have to go through, and you are either approved of or you are found useless. When you are found useless, if that is your portion, as David would say, this is what you have to look forward to on the day of judgment for all of eternity. Rain coals on the wicked. Fire and sulfur and scorching wind shall be their portion. Imagine your inheritance is a never-ending event of misery. David says, if you fail the test, that's what your inheritance is going to be. But then he says, but God is also righteous. He is holy where he looks over the righteous. He is just in that he will deliver punishment to the wicked, but he himself is the righteous one. Verse 7, for the Lord is righteous. He loves righteous deeds. Why does David make that statement? Well, if you look at Psalm 11, look what the individual says. Starting back in verse 1. In the Lord I take refuge, David says. How can you say to my soul, flee as a bird to your mountain? For behold, the wicked bend the bow. They make ready to their arrow upon the string, to shoot in darkness at the upright of heart. If the foundations are destroyed, what can the righteous do? The one giving advice says the righteous are hopeless. Well, what does David say? He says the righteous are the only ones that have hope. How are they the only ones that have hope? Because the Lord is righteous. And because the Lord is righteous and I am righteous, what does that mean? I am like God, and God likes righteousness. Therefore, he likes the deeds of the righteous. David says, you really think that the righteous doesn't have any hope? I am righteous, and God is righteous. What do you think that means, advisor? It means that God is looking down on me and is approving of me because I am living with him. Look at this. Behold his face. The righteous will behold his face, David says. We see a progression here. God is righteous. God loves righteous deeds. Therefore, God will reward those who are righteous, and they will behold his face. I have pondered many times what God looks like. I don't know exactly what Jehovah will appear to be. We know that we will be like Jesus when he comes. I don't know exactly what that's going to look like, but all I know is that I will be like him. And by being like him, I will be able to behold his face. You know, in our bodies right now, we couldn't handle God's glory. And we know that because we see in the Old Testament one who said, Lord, let me see your full glory. Let me see your face. And this is one of my favorite responses that God has. God says, you can't handle me. I'm so holy. I'm so pure. You can't handle me in the state that you're in. And the individual says, well, Lord, let me just see your back parts. I don't want to see your face. Let me just see your back. And God says, this is what I'm going to do. I'll let you see my back parts, but you can't even look directly at me. You look in this direction, and I will walk in your peripheral, and you can see my back parts in your peripheral vision. You know what happens? After just seeing the back parts in the peripheral, you know what Moses does? He comes down, and the people said, you got to put something over your head. We'll go blind. Brethren, God is so holy and so pure that if we looked upon him now, we would go blind because he is that righteous. But thankfully, God has prepared a way for us to behold his face. 1 Corinthians 15. If we do his will and live righteously, proclaiming the gospel, those who have fallen asleep in him will be raised up, and those who remain will be called up, and our bodies will change so that we will be fit for heaven. And it says that there will be no sun there because his glory will be the light. Brethren, I get chills every time I think about just exactly what God's going to look like. You know, we always think about all these questions that we're going to have. I got a list of questions. How come God made mosquitoes? Did Adam have a belly button? Did all of these things? And we have all these questions that don't matter. But we also have some questions that do matter. Very deep theological questions that are never answered in Scripture. The secret things belong to God. Well, I want to know those secret things, so when I get to heaven, I'm going to ask God about those things. You know what? I bet when we get to heaven, we are not going to remember those questions. Because when we see God, it doesn't matter anymore. When we see God and behold his face, you know what else is not going to matter anymore? The things that we suffered here on earth. David says, I am a righteous individual, and I will behold his face one day. And all of these things that you're afraid of, they don't bother me because God is the only one that can destroy both body and soul to hell. Now, this is how we're going to close it. Point number one. How do I apply this psalm to myself today? This was written hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago. How can I apply an ancient text that was a conversation between two other people to my life today? Point number one, here's the application. When one does not have God in their life, nor have trust in God, this is what they will have. They will constantly be running away, but have nowhere to go. They will constantly be in a state of fear and find no peace. And number three, they will constantly be failing, finding no victory. Now, What about point number 2? Here's our application from what David says. When one does have God in their life, having trust in Him and who He is, they will have the following. They will have a holy God who sees all. They will have a just God who shows no favoritism. And they will have a righteous God who rewards and punishes. Brethren, the latter list is what we need to be doing so that we can have this latter list. The first list sounds absolutely miserable, yet so many Christians fall into it too often. But very few see point 2 and apply it. I trust in who God is, that He will take care of the situation that I am dealing with. It does not matter what the situation is, brethren. God is in control. He sits in His throne in heaven. He looks down and He loves the righteous deeds of those who love Him. God is not going to abandon you. You may abandon God at some point, but God will never abandon you. Matthew chapter 10 and verse 28 says, "And do not fear those who kill the body, but can..." let me rephrase that. Do not fear those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Rather, what Jesus says, fear Him who destroys both soul and body in hell. I know we already referenced this passage, but I can stand up here and preach and proclaim until I'm blue in the face of we need to trust in God. But brethren, I understand how hard it is. There are times where I fall short in trusting in God and I want to deal with the situation. But there's a reason I'm not God. And there's a reason I'm not in control. God is. And because God is in control, we can have peace. Now, you may be in one of two categories. You might be in category 1, one who does not trust in God, therefore you are running, you are failing, and you are suffering, and there is no peace. But you want to trust in God now by giving your life over to Him as He sees fit, following the commandments in order to be one of His followers. Maybe you fall into category number 2, such as David. You are faithful, you are righteous, your deeds are even righteous, but you are still suffering. And you maybe are thinking, what if, what if, what if? And you need prayers for strength. Whatever the case may be, I beg and plead that you come now as together we stand and as we sing. What